Governor Gooch, who was the governor of Virginia at that time, what he did is he relaxed those religious toleration laws. He relaxed them and said, please come here. We want you to come here. We want you to settle. We want you to clear land and put up houses and make money, because that protects us and fills up our economy. So they came in large numbers, and he said, what we're going to do is we're going to relax those religious laws so that you still, when you create your parish and your county, you still got to build a courthouse, of course. You still got to elect a vestry. You still got to build a church. You got to hire a minister, who's the parish priest, and he's a government official. But we're gonna, wink, wink. We're gonna let you build your Presbyterian places of worship. You got to call them meeting houses. We're gonna let you marry your own people, bury your own people, but you still got to pay taxes to the church, and you still got to technically join the church. So the floodgates were open, and all those Germans and those Presbyterians from the north of Ireland just started flooding in here and settled. And by starting really in the 1720s, they just flowed in here. And a few people came over the mountains from the east, but they were in the minority very much. It was probably, depending on what part of the valley, if you go up to Winchester and Frederick County area, it's probably more heavily German. Then you get to Rockingham, and it's kind of mixed. And then that mix sort of starts changing to heavily Scotch-Irish by the time you get to Augusta County and Rockbridge. So by 1738, there were so many people here that it was and they were all technically in Orange County. They were all, because Orange County technically took in everything west of the Blue Ridge, even though Orange County today is east of the Blue Ridge. Right. So as they said, the leaders in Williamsburg said it's time to form new counties and simultaneously new parishes.
Well, let's expand. Yeah.
What's that?
Let's expand.
Yeah, let's expand. Let's get the tax money, right? So they formed two counties. These two giant counties. One was Augusta County, which was by far the biggest county, and it really took in. They carved them out of Orange County. So Augusta County was basically from the top of the Blue Ridge to the Mississippi River.
And you mean Front Royal-ish?
So the top of the Blue Ridge would be like where Albemarle County is.
I was thinking.
So the second county was Frederick County. Okay. And Frederick County was basically most of Shenandoah County, so Newmarket, Woodstock, and then north.
Right. So kind of where the Massanutten Ridge starts.
Right. So no, about halfway up Massanutten, because Rockingham, what's now Rockingham and Page County were part of Augusta County.
Okay. Oh, I didn't realize that.
No. Mm-hmm. Rockingham and Page County were part of Augusta, and a little bit of Shenandoah County. And then once you get past that, so about half the Massanutten.
And you got to realize too that the West Virginia would have gone up into the Panhandle to Maryland. Yeah,
would have been all of West Virginia, of course, and West Virginia, like Hampshire County and Jefferson County, and those were part of Frederick. And Clark County was part of Frederick. Warren County was part of Frederick, and those. So the northern part of the valley and a chunk of West Virginia was Frederick County. So Frederick County was big, but Augusta County just then sort of took in all of Southwest Virginia, the rest of West Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, a little bit of Michigan. So all of that was Augusta County.
Michigan.
Michigan. So basically to the Mississippi River. It was a huge county. And then they were named, of course, Augusta for Princess Augusta, who was the mother of King George III, who would figure into our, he's the guy that we had a little revolution against, and her husband, Prince Frederick, who is the father of King George III. So
one family, kept it in the family.
Yeah, so that's and as the county started being cut off, so the next county that was Augusta County got a lot smaller in 1780. So this is 1738. So from 1738 to 1745, Augusta County was in limbo. It had been created, but all its records were still kept in Orange County Courthouse. Right. And that's where they still are today, because we didn't have our act together enough to.
Oh, really?
Well, I mean, you can't keep your records in your courthouse if you don't have a courthouse yet. Right. So we were created, we were built. Yeah, so we were built, and then they were like, okay, now 1738, we got to get our act together, and we got to have a county seat. We got to build a courthouse. We got to hire a minister. We got to get a vestry together. We got to get a sheriff. It's a lot of work to do to create a county and a parish. We got to get our land. So a land agent had been set up, and his name was John Lewis. So to encourage this settlement for all these people to come, starting in the 1720s and 30s, what they did in Williamsburg is they just started giving away land to all the rich people in the East, like a guy named William Beverly, and a guy named Benjamin Borden, and a guy named Height up in the northern part, and the Lord Fairfax.
Was Borden more Rockbridge?
Borden is more Rockbridge in southern Augusta County.
There's a Borden Trail Road down there or something.
Right. So Borden's tract really starts about Middlebrook.
Okay.
And so like William Beverly, that's sort of the middle of Augusta County. About 100,000 acres he was given, and
Beverly Street.
Beverly Street. So William Beverly had 100,000 acres that he had to get rid of. He wasn't going to come out here and do that, but he hooked up with a guy named John Lewis, who's one of those people, those Presbyterians who came from the north of Ireland. He happened to come here under dark circumstances. He had gotten into an argument with his drunken landlord in Ireland and about raising the rent. And in the argument, the landlord had fired into his house and killed his brother-in-law and wounded his wife, Margaret Lewis. And so John Lewis was a little mad about that, and he took his shillelagh, which is a club, and he smashed in the head of Mungo Campbell, his landlord, and so he had to flee. So our first prominent settler came here as a fugitive from the law. And so anyway, he hooks up with, and he wasn't the last one that came as a fugitive from the law. But anyway, he hooks up with William Beverly and becomes his land agent. And so when you talk about the settlement of the Shenandoah Valley, there are two things, which was the Wild West. We were the Wild West. We were the frontier. We were as far as civilization. We were the edge of civilization or beyond civilization. There are two things that settled the frontier. One was the long rifle, because those settlers needed to hunt for their food. They didn't have a grocery store to go to. Need to hunt for their food, and defend their land. And the other thing was the compass. And you had to be able to survey land. Think about our first founders. George Washington, he was a surveyor. Wow. Thomas Jefferson's father was a surveyor, and Thomas Jefferson knew how to survey too. He didn't really do it for a living, but he did it for fun. But we just got to call the Historical Society. There you go, your compass. I'll show you a picture. The Augusta County Historical Society has a brass compass that was made by the assistant Augusta County surveyor in the late 1700s. The guy was also a dentist, and he made his brass dental tools. He was a dentist and a surveyor. And so he'd pull your teeth or survey your land. And
this reminds me of a Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer episode for some reason.
Okay, well.
Anyway, go ahead.
Anyway, but the land was the most important thing. You had to figure it out, who owned what, because it wasn't like you go look up someone's deed and figure out you had to figure it out from scratch.
Right.
And then we did meets and bounds. So it's like you go to this red oak and you go 4 degrees to the right, and then you follow the creek. So they were naming landforms. They had to name the creeks. So it was really from scratch how to figure. So opening up the land was key, because you needed to know who owned what land and what the boundary lines were so that the vestry could walk those boundary lines and figure up your taxes. It's all about getting taxes. So that's what they were busy doing, is opening up the land. Anyway, we got a call from the Historical Society recently about a man who had an old deed that George Washington did the survey of, and it was they said it was from, the deed was Augusta County, okay. And it was the Lost River, and the only Lost River that there is out in West Virginia. So it was a piece of Augusta County land that George Washington surveyed that's now in West Virginia. So that's pretty cool. But George Washington also surveyed Natural Bridge, and
it's just a little law. The first thing I thought about was Natural Bridge because there's that little river that goes somewhere.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
there is
I thought maybe it was that Lost River, but it's not.
That Lost River that comes out and then dumps into Cedar Creek, which goes under Natural Bridge, right? So by 1745, they had their act together. William Beverly had given a few acres of land along a creek called Lewis Creek, and to build a mill and for the county seat. So he'd started a mill there. It was called Beverly's Mill Place. He'd started a mill, and he'd given a few acres of land. Since he was the proprietor, who was the big landlord, he was sort of obligated to give some land so that the governmental entities could be built. So he gave some land, which is where the Augusta County Courthouse is, and they formed the government. And the piece of land that he gave was not, the first Augusta County justices were not pleased with it because it was too hilly, i.e. Staunton. It was too hilly, and it wasn't really a good piece of land, but they thought about it for a while, and then they said, okay, we'll take it. And
I never thought about it, but that courthouse is, for all intents and purposes, on the creek. If you tore down the current jail,
right. Mm-hmm.
The only thing there's nothing between the jail and the creek.
Right. And just think about, and Staunton, it's actually two creeks that come together. So there's Lewis Creek, and I think the other one might be Gum Branch, but all of Staunton is Staunton in the 1890s, after a horrific flood that swept out the downtown underground, put their creek underground. Okay. So it comes out at the parking garage on Johnson Street. It comes out under there, but it really flows all underground. But if you think of the park, it goes, they're starting to daylight a lot of it now, but right. It goes all the way underground, and it kind of hits then Lewis Creek, kind of where the old jail was. And
it goes under the police station, down the hill, through the wharf. Which
is why they had a mill there, and which is why White Star Mill was there, because it's great. It's great for milling, but it also means it floods a lot. And plus, it was just on the hill, and it wasn't very good it wasn't good land, which is why Beverly probably wanted to dump it. But anyway, they built a courthouse, a pretty crude little cabin, on the same footprint of today's courthouse. Today's courthouse is the 5th courthouse on that same site. And they also had to build, remember, they had to build a church, and they had to get justices selected, and they had to hire a sheriff or get a sheriff appointed, and then they had to build a church. So the church which where Trinity Episcopal Church is now. Right. That's not the original building. It was called Augusta Parish Church before the Revolution.
Same location.
Same location. Not the exact same footprint, but in that lot there. And that's why if you go into the churchyard at Trinity, you'll see very, very old tombstones, because it's the public burying ground. So people were buried there. Right. And so this all happened in 1745. So it took them about 7 years to get everything together. Where they built the courthouse, they had a clerk of court, and everything was very crude and basic. But they decided to name the county seat where these buildings were built Staunton, in honor of the wife of that Governor Gooch.
Lady Rebecca Staunton.
Lady Rebecca Staunton, you're right. Who actually, wasn't there a song about her in Spirit of Augusta?
Yeah. If I've written a song about it, I kind of remember it.
We might have to play a little bit of the song in the video. Yeah.
Did she say Stanton? Did she
as far as we know, she said Staunton.
Okay,
and spelled it A-U.
That's what I always tell people.
Yeah, so, like, how do most of us, not all of us, but how do most of us say A-U-N-T, like my aunt?
Yeah.
My Aunt Sandy. We don't say aunt. Some people do say aunt,
I
but
say this. I say my Aunt Rose is my Aunt Rose is my aunt. I say that in one sentence.
okay. Well, you're different, Richard.
Yeah. That's what.
And so, but anyway, so apparently it was spelled that way, and she said it that way, and so that's we're gonna not change her name, even though people think. Even though I tried to call 411 today, and they said, what city and state, please? And I said Staunton, Virginia. Did you say Vincent? No.
It's
So,
close.
yeah.
About 15 letters off. Other than that.
Yeah. So 1745 is when we actually became a working entity. So we built the courthouse right away. When we went to build the church, we just kind of drug our feet because all these people who were here were Presbyterian, or a little bit later, there were some of these Anabaptist people, but they weren't too interested in building a church.
So was there a first Presbyterian church before there was a Trinity Episcopal church?
Oh, there were 6 Presbyterian churches before
Trinity was ever
right. Before the Augusta Parish Church was built, there were 6. There was Tinkling Spring, Augusta Stone, Bethel, Timber Ridge, what's now Hebron, which is Brown's Meeting House, and Old Providence.
Oh yeah, way
and New Providence. So there were 6 or 7. So because there were very few Anglicans and English people, straight up English people living in Augusta County. So they had to elect a vestry.
So let me ask you this: did they? And you may not know this, but I'll ask. So if they are here before the Anglicans are here, so to speak, the church, the official buildings there, so they probably didn't pay any taxes, or did they have to take them to Orange?
Oh no! I mean, so what Augusta County did is they just turned the whole system on its head.
Okay.
That's a great question. So you remember there was no separation of church and state, so they didn't see themselves as Anglicans necessarily, but their governmental duty was
to start the church. Yeah.
to start the government church. So they had to when in 1745 when they built the courthouse, they also had to simultaneously have justices in place, and they had to elect a vestry. The first vestry was always elected, and then after that it was self-perpetuating from inside. They would elect their replacement. So they had to elect a vestry by law, or they couldn't be a county and a parish. So they did. Augusta County selected 12 men to be on their vestry, to be their government leaders, kind of like the Board of Supervisors. 10 of the 12 were Presbyterian.
Who built the Anglican Church?
Yes. So our early historians like John Whalen and all and John Lewis Payton, they describe Augusta County's leaders as doctrinally or theologically Presbyterian, but politically Anglican.
Okay.
So that's what they did. So they did that so they could, because they had to run the government. And there was in Williamsburg, the leaders in Williamsburg, who were mostly English, were pretty upset about that. They said they can't be that. They're supposed to be conformable to the doctrine and discipline of the Anglican Church. They can't be. And Governor Gooch and others said, hey, wait a minute. They're providing the buffer. They're going to provide tax money. They're a line of defense between us and any unrest that there is between the Native Americans and the French. And so get over it. And that's
Governor Gooch was he had a lot of foresight.
Yeah. So
enough to get a county, Goochland County, named after him.
Yeah, that's right. So that's what happened is they were allowed to continue. And so they had to, technically they had to hire a minister. And so what did they do? They looked around. Well, there'd been Presbyterians living here for decades, right? So they found a minister named a Presbyterian minister, and they sent him to England to get ordained as an Anglican. And he came back Anglican. And so then they hired him to be the government official who was the minister.
Do you know his name? What was his name?
John Hinman.
John Hinman.
Yeah.
The Presbyterian Anglican minister. Okay.
Yeah, he was a Presbyterian minister with an eye toward going up the ladder. They called him
Father Hinman.
They called him the racing parson, and because he had a little racetrack up in Rockingham County where he raced quarter horses.
Yeah, quarter horses.
Just a straight track along sort of the Kieseltown Road now, which was actually probably the old Route 11, which was the old Warriors Path and the Great Wagon Road. Anyway, but there's one other thing they had to do. They had to build a church, which they just drug their feet about it because it's like, we don't really need it. So they bought him, after he came back as an Anglican, they bought him a communion set and a Bible and gave it to him and said, go out and do your thing. And so he went out to created these what are called chapels of ease, which is sort of like for the few Anglicans that were out there, he went out and held services out in different places. There was a chapel of ease up in Rockingham County, for instance. The other thing that the county was required to do by law was that they had to create a glebe for the minister, because the minister had to have a way of making a living. So they had a glebe was a farm. They had to buy a farm and give it to the minister to live on to make his living. Because
they really couldn't pay money. They didn't have that much cash to deal with.
Well, and that's how the minister made his living. And he was a public servant. He got a salary and he got a farm, and so it was pretty good digs there.
That's Glebe School Road.
Well, that's Glebe School Road, because Glebe, and this is what happened in England. Glebes were all different sizes. It just, land had been divided up and settled for hundreds and hundreds of years. So it just sort of evolved as whatever worked there. But in Virginia, by 1745, it was in law that it had to be 200 acres, and it defined exactly what buildings had to be built on it: a house, a 2-story house, a barn, a spring house, a dairy house, da-da-da-da-da. So it was pretty spelled out, and we know a lot about the glebe here because, one, again, they drug their feet about it. And so the first minister, he just took some financial compensation because they hadn't built it and supplied it for him. So he stayed in Staunton and took room and board instead of going out and living on the glebe. So it really took them about almost to the American Revolution to build the glebe.
It didn't take half a day to get to Staunton.
What's that?
It had taken a half a day to get to Staunton from the glebe.
Well, yeah, I mean, it would be
downtown, 3 hours, couple hours at least.
Yeah, it would be a couple hours on horseback, even more if you were going to walk. It's probably about 6 or 7 miles.
Yeah.
But the problem is the builder was John Lewis, and he was hauled into court 2 or 3 times because he delayed and had problems with building it. And part of the problem was that kind of right in the middle of all this, the French and Indian War cropped up, and
building the glebe or the church at this point, or both?
The glebe.
The glebe, gotcha.
The glebe.
Okay.
The church, they did put a church together before they did the glebe. Okay. And it was a pretty basic church, right where Trinity is now.
Okay.
And probably built it because they needed to start burying people there and having some services there. But and the glebe, for all we know, the glebe cemetery was public land. It's a very historic cemetery now. The cemetery was established before the buildings were complete, almost certainly more than likely, because there's several people who are buried there who were victims of Indian incursions that came into the area, Indian raids that came into the area. So they probably established that glebe because they needed a place to bury people, and if they were killed out in that part of the county or died out in that part of the county, you're not going to haul them into Staunton.
Yeah, and so just for our viewing audience here, so that's basically you go out to Hebron Church, take a left at the organ shop, then take a right, and then you go until you see the historical marker.
Yeah, follow Glebe School Road, and you see the historical marker, and know that to the west of the marker, there's kind of a hill, and that's where the Glebe Cemetery is. And
can anybody go there, or is that?
You can go there, but it's best right now to ask the farmer who lives there, because you'd be going through his fields.
Right.
part of what the Historical Society would like to do is work with Augusta County as we move forward in the future. It's public land. It's owned by Augusta County. It's public land. It needs some tender loving care, but there is an easement to it, and it's against the law to keep somebody from going to a cemetery. But you have to have common sense, not let the cows out of the field and things like that. So we'd like to really work to have a walking trail there. It'd be a neat project. But if you can ever get there, hey, contact me. I'll hook you up with the farmer so we can make sure that we're not damaging his crops or letting the cows out of the field, and we'll take a trip there because it's a pretty neat place. There's a House of Burgesses members. There's at least 7 veterans from the American Revolution, but there's several victims of Indian raids that were killed there. So eventually the house was built, and we know a lot about it because, as I said, John Lewis was taken to court a couple times for not building it, and the descriptions of what he was supposed to be building are all in the court record. So that's pretty cool. But the reason that part of it is probably his Presbyterian and didn't really care, and nobody, was really helping him. But the other reason was the French and Indian War happened, and so these people were a lot more worried about getting killed from.
And that's 1750s, right?
Yeah, from raids that were coming in here, and so the whole tax base of Augusta County, not the whole tax base, but a significant number of the people went east of the Blue Ridge and said, we're getting the heck out of here. John Craig, who was a minister at Tinkling Spring and Augusta Stone, said, that's just being a chicken. What you need to do is fortify your house and just stay here. And
is that Craig County?
That eventually is Craig County, right?
Yeah, John Craig, yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Because
he did east of Roanoke, west of Roanoke.
Yeah, he's the first Presbyterian minister west of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and he was at Tinkling, and then eventually became just Augusta Stone. And he traveled all down into Rockbridge and Botetourt and those areas, baptizing and
Craig is connected to Botetourt in the corner, so
right. Mm-hmm. Craig's Creek. There's lots of Craig's Creek around, and so he was a pretty. So John Lewis gets all the credit for being the first guy around, but John Craig is probably one of the most prominent early leaders. And then John Lewis's sons did a lot. John Lewis did a lot, but so did his sons.
Yeah, Andrew and
and they became a couple of them became surveyors,
right?
Because it's all tied to land and compass and things like that. So anyway, and so that's kind of, so the tax base left, and so John Lewis had no money to build that glebe, and so it really wasn't all his fault. And then the tax base, after the war was over, the tax base comes back, and Augusta County sets on its course forward. They also did a couple other things, like when Augusta County was formed, Virginia's currency was tobacco, that tobacco that you were talking about, and but nobody was growing tobacco here. Not because it was hard to grow, because it's not, but because how are you going to get it to market?
Right.
How are you going to? You got to go over the mountains that everybody avoided.
River, yeah.
So you take those big hogsheads of tobacco and you roll them up to Afton Mountain and just let it go, and it arrives in Williamsburg. How do you get it there? Until they started eventually opening up the river, the James River was open to these long bateau boats. So in southern Augusta County, you could get to it, but it's still in northern Augusta County. So people weren't growing tobacco. Tobacco was not the cash crop. But just let me be clear that those settlers who came here were never here to be subsistence farmers on the frontier. They came here to make money. And there's a book about this called Commercialism and Frontier. But they came here to make money. So they built their mills. They built their iron furnaces. And
they built their stills.
They built what?
Built their stills and their mills.
They built their stills, and that's exactly right. And especially during the French and Indian War, they talked about why are we in all our little pubs and taverns? Why are we paying all this money for this rum to come in when we can have a? Basically, there's a document that says the people who are bringing in alcohol are picking our pockets.
Okay.
And I think the term was picking our pockets. And we need to make our own whiskey and sell it, and because we could do it right here and make a lot more money. So yeah, so there's stills, their mills, their iron factories, and the other thing that they hooked into that really made them money was growing flax and then growing hemp to make fiber. So they exported a lot of textiles. So, but they early on at the beginning, instead of paying the minister's salary and the sheriff's salary and paying all those salaries in tobacco, they petitioned Williamsburg, the the colony's capital, to be able to pay in pounds sterling, so in cold hard cash instead of tobacco. Right. And they were granted that reprieve because they didn't have any tobacco to pay people.
Right.
So there was a little tobacco grown in the 19th century, kind of in southern Augusta County and Rockbridge, because they had the canal that could connect it to Richmond. And then also when the railroads came in, it was a little bit of tobacco. But they were growing flax and they were growing hemp. And once they started growing hemp, it's a pretty labor-intensive product, and that's when they really started bringing in African Americans as slaves. And so that's a whole nother, we're going to do a whole nother maybe a couple of series on the African American story that was here, because it's a fascinating story and really brings in a whole new segment of the population that really are also our founders of Augusta County's important history. So that really triggered that change in the labor techniques. So
anyway, so basically that set up until the Revolutionary War. That was kind of the premises of Augusta County.
That was Augusta County. The Presbyterians who played at being Anglican just to make sure that they could be leaders in the governmental process. And mostly it was Presbyterians and very few of the German-speaking people, for a couple of reasons. One, there's the language barrier, and two, the Presbyterians who came in, they were coming in from Ireland, so they were already British citizens, whereas so they didn't.
Oh, okay, okay, I didn't think about that. Yeah.
So they didn't. So they already had a leg up in the governmental system. So they really dominated the government more than the German speakers.
Yeah. And from my own family history, I know that I've got my mother's side, the Sutcliffs, Setliff. They were in southern Buckingham County over on Route 60, US 60. Right. And the way I found them was they had voted not to tithe to the Anglican Church anymore, like in 1801. So that was after the Revolution.
Right. There's about 30 years that it was very, so it's during the Revolution, if you remember, Thomas Jefferson actually helped write the Statute of Religious Freedom in Virginia, because he was, even though Thomas Jefferson was Anglican, but he saw how unjust it was that everybody, no matter your religious persuasion, had to pay taxes to the Anglican Church,
right?
And had to pay. I mean, the Anglican Church was a pretty wealthy church. They had buildings, they owned slaves, they owned silver, communion silver, and so why should, if I feel like I'm a Baptist, why should I pay money to that? So that Statute of Religious Freedom in Virginia became part of our Bill of Rights, okay, for our Constitution. And then so Virginia was a leader there in stripping away, but at that point you had almost 200 years of organized religion, of Anglican Church being tied in closely with the government. And so how do you begin stripping that away and separating them? And it's called disestablishment is what it's called. I don't know, when I was in the 5th grade, I think, and we were studying words and how to divide words, where to hyphenate them and learning like that, we had a big word that anti-disestablishmentarianism. I don't know if you ever remember that, but it was kind of the word that you would get.
I missed that one, but I did have pollution in the 1st grade.
Anti-disestablishmentarianism, which is people against the people who are against the church. And so it was from 1776, in Virginia, they started started separating that. But those ministers who lived on those glebes, you can't just say, hey, you're out of here. You're still the minister of a church. So they wrote laws disestablishing the church, trying to get it all separated. And basically it was, if the church was there and they still had a congregation that was going, they could stay.
You get grandfathered in, yeah.
But yeah, they're kind of grandfathered in. And if you were a minister living on a glebe, you got to live there until you died.
Okay.
And then it went back. And so in Augusta County's case,
I guess it went back to the county. It went back to the county.
Well, the minister who was there was a guy named Alexander Balmain, and he actually joined the American Revolution as a soldier. He probably is the one who wrote. Augusta County had a declaration, kind of a Declaration of Independence, before our official U.S. Declaration of Independence.
Okay.
Augusta County had one, and he's probably the author of that. And he anyway joined the Revolution, and after the war, he became an Anglican minister in the New Episcopal Church of America up in Winchester County. So he left. So the glebe was unoccupied, and he was the assistant rector, but probably the one who was living there. And so the glebe was unoccupied. So what they had to do was they sold it. After the war, there was a lot of legislation in the Virginia General Assembly that had been moved to Richmond of what to do with these glebes and these churches that were abandoned. So they had to sell it, and they could do two things with it. One was put it toward education,
Okay.
or to the overseers of the poor. And Augusta County, it went to schools, to education, even though it was a private academy because there was no public schools, but went to the Augusta County Academy.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that'll probably get our listeners, readers, viewers, no readers, unless you read like down here, it's got our.
Yeah, we don't have closed captioning yet. We'll get that one day.
Yeah. That's going to be sponsored by some major plumbing firm, like it is on Channel 2 at 12.
Let me just throw in the Augusta County, even though you don't realize it today when you go around it, we have still strong ties to all that colonial and early republic period here in Augusta County that we don't even think about. So our county seal, which is on the county flag, which is that great big seal that is behind the Board of Supervisors, and you've probably seen it. It's really kind of a little silly scene of a shepherd or a piper, sitting with his back to a tree, and he's got some cows that he's, I guess, kind of soothing in a field. So it's a tree, and it's a shepherd of some sort, or a cow herd sitting there with his pipe and the animals there. It's a very pastoral scene. And around it is a Latin phrase that means, let us return to the golden ages. And that is Augusta County seal. And that is the seal that was created before the Revolution.
Okay.
As far as we know, that's the original seal. It shows up on pre-revolutionary documents. Now they've kind of cleaned it up because over the years, those cows kind of turned into blobs, and they've kind of used computers to make them look like cows again. But
Right.
but that's our seal from the beginning. And so Augusta County has always been an agricultural county from the beginning, and we're still the second leading agricultural county in the state. To Rockingham is first, and Rockingham came out of Augusta. Rockingham and Rockbridge were pulled out of Augusta in 1778,
Okay.
both because of the Revolution. Rockingham was named for a guy in the British Parliament, Lord Rockingham, who supported the Americans in the Revolution. And Rockbridge, which is named for Natural Bridge, of course, they decided to make their county seat Lexington after the Battle of Lexington and Concord.
Oh, okay. So, all right. So, I guess that's probably a good stopping point. We've been going on. Yeah, great stopping point. We'll see what happens next week. Sometimes we get inspired. We've still got to do the African Americans in the county. This is episode 10. We'd like to thank Catherine Morse for being our sponsor. If anybody else is interested in sponsored, you can do it at $25.
Let us know. It's a pretty cheap sponsorship.
Yeah, name it like a big time. It's like big time TV show.
Right. For $25.
Yeah,
you can sponsor a show. That's
okay.
Great.
All right. Thank you, Nancy. It's always good to hear what you have to say about the history of Footnotes in Valley history. So I'm Richard Adams. That's Nancy, and we'll see y'all next time.
All right, take care.